Welcome back to Following Noah on a Stormlight podcast. This week is episode 160, and we have finished Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. Paul, how are you?
Great. I'm glad we got to the end. I'm really excited to talk about it with y'all.
Elliot?
I think I'm still recovering from the ending of this book. The whole second or last, the whole last quarter of this book was a roller coaster
Yeah,
for sure.
so I don't know if I've ever been truly faked out by the ending of a book, where the end of this book has two epilogues, because the first epilogue is not actually an epilogue, it's just the last chapter. It's the actual last chapter, and the second epilogue is the actual epilogue. So he really does sell the sad ending, which we'll get to in a little bit. And Hoyt even Hoyt fakes out his audience saying, I'm sorry I have to give you this sad ending," as he's beginning the epilogue, which is the happy ending. So we'll get into all that, but we're doing 38 through another epilogue of Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. Let's roll intro and we can discuss it.
And the postscript. You forgot the postscript. We got to talk about that too.
Ah, yes, the postscript.
Yeah.
Is that really part of the book, though? Would you classify that as part of the book?
Yes, because
It-
what else would it be classified as?
The postscript.
I mean, yeah, it is the postscript, but it's in this book and only in this book kind of thing. Like, it is between the covers.
By definition, it is after the book. The postscript.
it's-
That's what it means.
It's author notes, it's
Sure.
PS,
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Is that actually what PS means?
Postscript, yes.
Postscript? Well, I never thought about that, but I guess that logically makes sense.
You have learned something today, Paul.
I did. 100%.
All right. So, last episode, we kind of stopped in pretty much the only stopping point we could have stopped at in the in the finale here. We set up Nikaro in front of the shroud, ready to defend against the 100 nightmares that are coming. Yumi has just recovered her memories, and that's where we pick up in chapter 38. I predicted last week that Yumi would be able to get to the machine that's in the town without any issue, because everybody is off assaulting Kirihito. Where's that? No, yeah, Kirihito.
Yep.
I was wrong. The four scholars are still here defending the machine, or at least pretending to defend the machine. The machine that's there is one of our fake. We're going to be talking about a lot of fake outs in this episode. There is a lot of
bait and
sleight of hand in this book, and a lot of it is revealed in this episode. So, one, the machine that the spirits have asked us to stop is not the machine that we've been presented with for the second half of this book. There is a big bad machine in, I don't remember the name of the capital city, but that's the machine we're supposed to be stopping. So when Yumi goes to destroy the machine, she successfully does that, but then it's revealed to us that the Nightmare Scholar guys don't actually care about that machine. They are tasked by the big machine in the capital to defend it. So what did you guys think of this reveal in 38 and 39, I think?
I was really happy about this, and I feel like it made a lot of sense. Okay. Because we knew that there was an outcry from the beginning of the book with these spirits asking for freedom, and then we see later this distinct, stop the machine, and so it made sense with what the machine we were seeing was doing, because our understanding is that it was trapping spirits, but it seemed less harmful still. Like, it didn't seem that bad. Like it trapped a spirit a day kind of thing, which is a decent amount,
Mhm.
but it makes way more sense to have a much larger, like, calamity scale, like big machine that is like impacting the shroud itself. It has much larger implications. That makes way more sense for this story, I think, in a classic Sander Lynch scenario, I guess. For it to be something much larger scale.
This this little twist ended up fitting kind of nicely that I made that had nothing to do with this machine, or at least I didn't intend it to, and then it just kind of sort of happened that way.
Yeah.
This was this kind of got to where I was so terrified we were going to go, which was some kind of Matrix style. The robots are farming the humans and turning them into electricity kind of thing. And that's kind of true.
I mean,
It,
it's pretty much, if you simplified things down to basic terms, that's pretty much what's happening.
yeah, you've got humans create machine, machine turns around and feeds on humans, and then creates this whole system where it controls everything, including illusions that it creates for everyone. We learned that so much of what we've been seeing was fake. Uh, It was at the end of this, I was trying to parse out like what was real and what was fake in
Yeah.
all the different things that we saw. It was confusing, but yeah, I think this whole there's a big machine behind all of this was I think it was a good direction for the story to go.
Okay. I have several thoughts on not only this, but multiple reveals that we get in this book, but they're not all confined to this episode. So next week, when we do our book wrap up, I think I'm going to talk about this more and in depth, and kind of compare them all together. So I think I'll actually save some of my thoughts on some of these reveals and how I feel about them till next week, and I'll compare them all side by side and which ones worked for me and which ones didn't. Um, but as far as like a story mechanic, I think it's good. I think this is uh, a fine way to take the story. I didn't see it coming, and there's nothing wrong with that. Um, but I do really like the way that Yumi fights this machine, for lack of a better um term. It has a investiture barrier up around it because it's been given the command by these engineers: protect yourself and create energy, or I think that's the or create um investiture. I don't remember what the command is. So it does that. It harvests the investiture from the things nearby, which is people, and it protects itself. And so the way Yumi actually ends up fighting this machine is by draining its investiture, attracting the spirits away from the machine to her, but creating this master artwork piece, which I actually think I will go ahead and put up on the screen now. There's a really good artwork piece in the book of Yumi and her hundreds of rock stacks that she's using to detract the spirits away from the machine, which I thought was a really cool way to for a climax for this book. So I really enjoyed that.
Real quickly, since we're talking about that moment, I, I wanted to chime in and say I loved that scene where she just goes crazy with this ultimate masterpiece of rock stacking because of this the whole concept of like this ultimate master.
Mm,
We learn, and I think this was hinted to us before with the whole memory deletion and stuff like this. But we learn in these chapters, one of our many reveals is that Yumi has been reliving the same day for 1700 years.
Yeah.
1,700 years. She has lived the exact same fake day. Well, like real action, but filled with illusions. This kind of created for her day just to keep control of her because she has so much investiture. She's so strong, the machine can't like forcibly control her. So it has to create this cage of illusions to give her something to do so that she thinks she's in this world. But because she's done that, because she has relived the same day over and over and over, where she does this rock stacking every day, she has 1,700 years worth of training for multiple hours every single day. And because of that, and the muscle memory, Hoyd talks about this, the muscle memory that she builds up from that ridiculous number of hours. I should have calculated it, how many hours that would be. Assume like, 3 hours each of those days times, I guess we don't know how many days are in a year.
Mm.
Anyway, we could do a little guessing, but thousands, thousands and thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of hours training doing this. She is like the ultimate master. She's put so much time into this rock stacking that she's just like unmeasurably good at this. I thought that whole concept was just fascinating.
I would like to apologize for you to Yumi in my lack of faith in her abilities. In one of our art pieces, she stacks 3 bowls on top of each other, and I doubted her ability to be able to balance that bowl. And with 1,700 years worth of experience, I bet it could be done, that you could stack exactly 3 bowls on top of each other. So I recant, and that is doable with that amount of skill.
I'm really
Yeah,
glad you remembered that, Trevor. That I think that's hilarious.
somebody go crunch the numbers, but I'd be willing to guess that Yumi has more hours spent stacking rocks than you or I will ever live in our whole lifetime.
Oh, easily, yeah.
Yeah,
Like
likely.
assume that
Makes
we
sense.
live to 100. Every single hour that you and I are alive, Yumi has spent more than that just stacking rocks.
Ooh, another question. She spends exactly 144 seconds underwater every day to summon the spirits in the pool. How long has she been underwater in her entire life?
Mm,
The-
that's a good one.
we need to know
Roughly
how many
2
days are
minutes
in
a
a
day.
year on this.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
That's my
But yes,
question for Brandon this year. How many days are in a year on what's the name of the planet? Kamashi?
Oreo?
No,
Oh,
we learned the name of the planet in the final epilogue.
yeah, that's right.
Um and that's very important. I want to know how many days are in a year for my calculations.
Yes, to know
for
if she
science.
spent more time underwater than I will be alive.
Correct, exactly.
You know?
All right. Let's talk about Painter. Painter is face to face with the Shroud at the end of last episode, and then kind of muses to himself, I guess I'm going to die here. I guess we're all going to die here. There's nothing I can do about it. And then he thinks, well, what would Yumi do in this situation? Yumi would go ask for somebody's help. She would go reach out to her community. She would go reach out to society and ask for help. Something that Nikaro has maybe never done in his life is asked for help. So he does that. He goes and firstly apologizes for his actions and how they hurt his former friends, and then gives them this crazy story of, you got to believe me, there's 100 nightmares coming to attack right now, please come to the edge of the city to help me. And they all kind of look at him and they're like, okay, I mean, if you're correct, then we should probably be there, and if you're not correct, Tojin, I think, is the one that says this, if he's not correct, the worst that happens is I sit there for 2 hours and go home. So they do end up going, and it does end up being quite the dramatic painting sequence. I guess I don't know if I would ever say that sentence in my life, but there there's a very fulfilling action sequence of 37 normal painters versus 100 stable nightmares. It's pretty cool.
That would be a really fun scene to try and portray visually.
Yeah.
And we get a little bit of artwork on it. One of the art pieces in the book, I think, is from that scene, but adding in the motion to it, movie climax kind of moment where you got all these painters who are doing battle with nightmares, but they're not like physically doing battle, they're painting as the nightmares are trying to attack them. That would be really cool to watch.
That one.
Yeah, that one.
The painting on the floor. I think that's Nakaro defending Akane.
And I- one of these moments, though, that's before the battle was a really key moment for me in Painter's story. And I think Tojin is going to be my like unsung hero
Mm,
of this book
yeah.
because Trevor, you mentioned it. Painter goes to his friends to try and convince them to, hey, we need to gather all the painters and go over to the shroud because we got 100 nightmares about to come attack our city. Like something ridiculous.
Yeah.
He has told them monumental lies in the past. They have no reason to believe him. None whatsoever. But what Hojin says in this scene was really moving for me. None of the rest of them want to go. Kane, all the rest of them, no, sorry. You've cried wolf too many times. We're not going. Hojin pipes up and says, "Well, what do we have to lose? It's just what's going to happen if he's wrong? We get embarrassed because we asked all of our friends to come for nothing, and we sit out there for 2 or 3 hours in the cold. Like that moment was just heartwarming for me that he is willing to embarrass himself to go out and ask all of his friends to go do something he probably thinks 95% likely nothing's about to happen here and this is going to look I'm going to look really dumb. But he's willing to do that for his friend who has massively betrayed him in the past.
Yeah.
And he's like, "Guys, we can take some embarrassment. It's worth a chance." Like, man, I love that moment from him.
It was as a reader, right? It was really refreshing to see the logic there of like the painter's plea to be like, please, please, please help. Like this is gonna happen. It's the crazy person who runs in, right? Um, I think of this is kind of a really funny comparison, but I think of Beauty and the Beast and Belle's father, crazy old Maurice, is what
Oh,
he's labeled
okay.
because he he tries to tell people that there's a beast in this castle and all this stuff and all these things, you know. But that's really ridiculous connection. But it's neat to see Toji just be like, hey, like I mean, what's the worst that could happen if we go check it out, you know? So
I didn't
'cause
know.
normally I feel like you'd be met with like no, like I'm sorry, like we just can't do anything kind of thing, you know. And then you're like, okay, how is the character gonna get someone to go? But he was pretty willing.
I didn't know where that was going until you got to Crazy Old Maurice. But yes, I agree with you. That's good. That's a good reference. Okay, I want to back up and talk to you guys about the mechanics of the story real quick. Elliot, last episode, you said at the beginning of the episode, I feel like we've got 90% of this revealed. There's still a little bit that I don't understand. And then you said, I wish Hoyt would just sit us down and explain to us what exactly is going on. And then you turn to chapter 39, and that's exactly what happens. Hoyt says to the reader, to the listener of the story, okay, back up. Let me explain everything. What do you guys think of that in the book? Did you like obviously Elliot you were asking for that, but now that you actually got exactly that, did you appreciate it, or did you? I kind of wish that the info had been given to us in a different way, as opposed to just an explanation from Hoyd. Um, I don't mind it, but it was kind of odd for me. And I could totally see how, especially if you don't like Hoyd, which there are several people who like don't really appreciate Hoyd and his humor and his wit. Um, something like this right at the climax of the story, and then you get pulled out of it to get explained history, is kind of an odd mechanic. What did you guys? I want to hear what you guys think of it.
I'll talk about the book as a whole and how this fits into it next week in our wrap up episode. But here in this moment, where Boyd does do exactly what I asked him to do, where he says, "You're probably a little confused by now. Let me explain this." It it works for me. It does.
Okay.
I can totally see how this will throw people. I can totally see how this will rip away the some of the immersion in the fantasy. There's gonna be people who get to this moment and they say, "I was in the story, I was in the moment, and you ripped it away from me in this moment where Hoyd breaks the fourth wall and just for many pages explains what's going, expository." I'm dubbing this Hoyd-splaining. I I think we just got Hoyd-splained too, like 4 times in the closing part of this good book.
Yeah.
But I was already receiving this book as a, rather tongue-in-cheek Groundhog Day style. This is going to be a little bit crazy. We're going to bounce around back and forth. Unexpected things are going to happen. It's not Stormlight. It's not Mistborn. I was never trying to make it that. I was not approaching this like an epic fantasy story because of what I knew from the very start, the inspirations of this story and how it comes from a very different place. I think Brandon's trying to do something very different. And so to have a very different experience where Boyd pulls me aside out of the story to go explain the mechanics of what's happening, it worked for me. It actually did.
Well,
I agree. Um, I I've been debating how much I like being explained to, if that makes sense. Like, it's fun to have the mystery of it, like we've had, I feel like, all through Stormlight. It's fun to have that mystery and kind of figure it out. But I will say, if I didn't have this podcast and I read that series on my own, I would have loved the series, but I would not have really figured out a lot of the inner workings. And so I think as a book to just pick up and read, I think that's a really good thing, and I really like the Hoyt explanations.
okay.
I think the hottest topic for debate, and we should probably save this to get into next week, I think is going to be, does this work, the Hoyd splaining and the Hoyd narrating style, does this work for a new reader, or does that fact alone make this an experienced Cosmere reader book only? We don't have to get into that now, but I think that becomes the fascinating question here.
Yeah, that is an interesting question. I didn't actually think about that. Um, I think it does work for me as well, simply because, Elliot, what you were saying, how the book presents itself. It's not trying to be anything more than, a fun fairy tale story told by Hoyd. And the fact that it is that, then Hoyd sitting you down and giving you a little bit of explanation, I also agree. It didn't bother me that much. Now obviously if this were in another series, if this were in Stormlight or Mistborn, and there was some all-knowing narrator who sat me down in the middle of all the reveals, yes, that of course that wouldn't work. But I think because of how this book is written, I think it actually works pretty well. And obviously it was an experiment from Sanderson, so I think it works fairly well. Obviously, I wouldn't want him to do it all the time, but for what it is, I think he pulled it off.
So something I'm curious to know what y'all thought about. So with Painter defending, effectively leading the charge or calling the defense against these nightmares, the whole crew there, they're painting basically whatever they can, and it sounds like whatever they paint kind of stalls the nightmare for a while. Like they paint bamboo, right? And it turns into bamboo, and then it's almost like a temporary fix. Like that doesn't really completely do it. But what Painter discovers, he discovers this as he sees Leon, and he thinks, I know who this is. I know Leon. I could effectively draw her perfect. I know the personality and all these things. And he draws Leon, and it effectively like saves her. She turns into her original human form and is Leon, like is
Mhm.
kind of normal, right? And so it kind of has this breakthrough moment of, can we figure out who these people are and paint them as themselves, kind of thing.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know what y'all think about it. Like just as I thought it was a pretty neat moment. I guess an abstract action scene. You know, like it wasn't just swords killing the bad guys. It's like we have to paint them as themselves. It was interesting. And then I have a further thought to add to this as well. But I want to know what y'all think.
So I really appreciated the exploration, the full exploration of perception and its mechanics. And I feel like this entire book, almost, one of the inspiration questions for this book was, what if you took that fire spren interlude from Words of Radiance and made the spren the bad guys and you're trying to fight them and how you would fight them. And so there's a whole book explaining like the different things you could do with that magic system of, I perceive you as something, therefore you are that. Um, 'cause- so I really did think that it was a good and earned reveal that the way that you fight a stable nightmare is you remind it who it used to be. I think that is a really good mechanic for what's been built in the Cosmere so far. I thought that was really good.
And Trevor, you almost predicted this. You were gosh darn close.
Yeah,
You predicted that Nikara was going to paint Yumi.
right. On the
She
mural,
does
which he
later.
does. Which, okay,
And
real quick there. I was incorrect on the inspiration of why, but I'm glad I
yep,
was. Why he does it is better. But we'll get there.
yep,
Go ahead.
yep. Yeah, you just like my prediction earlier, where I was like right on the right track, but then it ended up not being quite the way I was thinking about it. Same thing here. You thought a picture of Yumi would remind them who they are. No, Nicaro takes it one step farther and he paints them.
Yeah.
So he turns them into people, which he flashes back to like the very beginning of the book where we're told that painters are taught not to paint nightmares into people because if you paint a nightmare into a person, it can still come attack you. Well, the added element here is what you're talking about. It's that memory aspect of it. That I'm going to paint you as who you truly were, and then they have this rush of memories and kind of realize what's going on there. Because just like we saw before with Leon, the nightmares don't really quite understand what's going on when they're in nightmare form. They're just hungry. They want experience. They want that they know they're missing something and they're trying to find it. But when Painter's able to perceive them in their true forms, it kind of brings it all together. But then, of course, it turns sad as they all like melt away later.
Yes. I do think that's a little bit interesting that it feels like Nikaro has saved them from their nightmare selves, and then they die 20, 20 minutes later as Yumi completes her mission. So,
Right. Which is sad, but then on the flip side, it's like they die, but they really died 1700 years ago.
right.
They've been undead, if you will, for a long time. It's almost like that release of the undead spirit moment instead of a, death of a physical being.
Yeah.
There's a quote in amongst these chapters which I want to hit real quick before we move on. Yumi escapes from the engineer, the scholar guys. She does it by flying on a tree, which is kind of a interesting sequence. But when she lands, they attack her. I think there's
Yeah.
4 of them, right? And they're in full on nightmare form, and they just stab her with their claws, and they're gonna suck all the spirit life out of her. And Yumi has this moment. The quote is, "I am the one that nightmares fear." And it's referencing back to something that Design told her. Design was like reading her spirit web and was like, "Oh my gosh, everybody should be terrified of you." And Yumi remembers that, and she's like, "Oh, I shouldn't fear them. They should fear me." And in that moment, she just like reverses the sucking out of her spirit and like destroys them instead of them destroying her.
Yeah.
That was a cool like realizing and accomplishing her true power moment.
Yeah. I think the chapter 41, the last quote unquote chapter of the book, is our sad ending. And we're in Yumi's head as she's completing her masterpiece stacking. She's draining the machine of its investiture and of its spirits. But as she does it, she realizes that the shroud will dissolve, and all of the projections of the shroud, the nightmares, even the Yokihijo, all of that will dissolve, so including me. But she does it anyway, because she knows that she needs to free these spirits from their trapped state. The other she mentions that she has a connection with the other Yokihijo as she's doing it, and they are grateful to her for what she's doing. But at the end of the chapter, uh, Yumi and Nikaro have a connection, and they talk with each other. They have a conversation about not all happy, or not all stories can have happy endings, and I'm sorry for this one. Um, and the TV show that is referenced earlier in the book is, and I think we called this as well. It is a direct reference to the story that we're reading. What I didn't catch was the surprise bonus episode that is in the TV show. So it the TV show deliberately has like the long credits. It's supposed to show its audience that this is the last episode. It's a sad ending. They're not going to be together. And then there's a surprise bonus episode that Yumi's told about later, and we have 2 epilogues, which resolves our sad ending into a happy ending. Which I'll be honest, Brandon, you got me. I shedded some tears in 41, and then at the beginning of the epilogue, Hoyt's like all dramatic and saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, I had to bring this sad ending to you, but that's just how it is." And Nakaro's over there painting something, but don't bother him because we're all just so sad, and sad endings and stories. And then he just kind of offhandedly says, "And Yumi comes back from the dead." And then there's a second epilogue after that. So I I appreciate this as a story mechanic because I don't know if I've ever been faked out in a book like that. I thought that was pretty funny.
So I agree with you, Trevor. It was a huge fake out. I will say, I was actually of the camp that like I wasn't going to believe that she was completely dead until like the end,
The book, yeah, the book was
like
over.
the postscript,
Yeah,
whatever. Like as long as there is still text that is tied to this story, I am still holding on that they're going to live together happily ever after. I was of that. I think was getting a little meta with that, a little outside of the actual story itself. I had mentioned this before that it is Brandon Sanderson's wife's favorite of the secret projects, and from what I understand, she likes a happy ending. So I was like, surely not. Surely she didn't choose the tragic ending. The like, you know, the yeah, the bittersweet ending, you know. And so I was still holding out hope, and I'm glad I did because if it, well, it made me nervous though because for a bit there I was doubting. I was doubting that, and I would have been kind of sad if it was a very sad ending.
I I didn't fall for it. And I'm not just saying this because I've read the final ending, but there were two reasons that I was 100% sure that Yumi was coming back even after the final chapter, and I was ready to potentially heavily trash this novel if she did not come back. And the first reason was kind of what you're talking about, Paul. I was thinking about the book in the big picture. Just the tone of this book, the premise of this book, the lighthearted nature of so many of the elements of this book, to have a truly sad ending would have just been that would not have sat right with me.
Mhm.
That would not have felt appropriate for the story that we just read. I would have been furious. I have nothing against a sad ending. I think that tragic stories are perfectly like you, me, and Painter talk about. There are reasons to have sad stories. There's sad things in life. That's perfectly applicable. The way this story was presented to us was not a tragedy.
Right.
And if it ended that way, I would have been mad. So even after chapter 41 was done, for that reason alone, I was like, no, not possible. Two, I was all in 100% on my prediction of the TV show in the book was the allegory for the story that we were reading, and that story got the surprise happy ending. So I was supremely confident that in the last 6 pages of the book, we were going to get a surprise happy ending, and did happen. I feel like that was at least a little bit telegraphed by the author.
And I do think that it's fairly predictable. I just forgot. I didn't remember that there was a surprise bonus episode in the because it's kind of just mentioned offhand by Izzy,
Mhm.
I think. And it's in a scene where there's a lot of other important things going on, and it's just this off two sentence dialogue. So I just didn't remember as I was reading it. I was like, no way we're getting a sad ending. Um
And it's also we're getting all this in the midst of a pretty exciting Sanderlanche. I mean,
yeah.
things moved fast in those last few chapters. It was very, page turny. And so I bet a lot of people bought into that just in the emotion of, flipping through pages and reading fast. But then of course you find out just a couple pages later that you get your surprise happy ending.
So I was right, but for the wrong reasons. Nikaro paints Yumi on his mural. And I will show the artwork now because it's in the book. The back cover of the book is this painting that he puts on of Yumi sitting in the tree. And it's breathtaking. Um and the way that the painting comes about is better than my prediction. He I predicted that he would paint Yumi and all the nightmares would come to the town, recognizing Yumi, remembering, solving the problem. Instead, the nightmares were already evaporated with the rest of the shroud at this point. The story is over, as Hoyt says. The like we are all mourning, the loss of Yumi, and Nikaro's over there refusing to have an end to this. But Nikaro, as a tribute to Yumi and his love for her, goes and paints this picture of Yumi on his mural for himself. He doesn't need an audience. He does it for himself. And that is a great period to Nikaro's story of, yes, he is a real painter because a real artist was the discussion, I don't know, a couple episodes ago. because he can create without an audience. He does it for himself because he has the inclination to create. And as Yumi is departing the world, she comes and touches his shoulder, um, um, witnessing the um, witnessing the mural with him, and that's when they have and that's when Nikaro pleads with her to stay and have a happy life, that she deserves happiness and can choose love. Um, Great ending to a great story, and I love the inspiration for Nikaro's mural is for himself, not for anybody else.
I got a little emotional in this scene because of the fact that you're in the epilogue, right? So there's only 6 or so pages left in the entire book, and the artwork that we're looking at here is on the inside of the back cover. So you can kind of lift the pages up and read this whole sequence while looking at this exact piece of art, and you can read about the different elements of it that Nikaro is just pouring himself into while you look at it. Like that combination of reading the story while looking at the visual piece that's being described to you in that exact scene was that was special for me. This is a cool experience that I don't think I've ever had in a book before. I've seen many artist depictions of scenes in a book. I don't think I've ever read a scene for the first time while having that exact, what's being described in that scene in front of me in my hand in the same book. That is the fact that the art in this book is so intertwined with the story and so a part of the experience is just really, really cool.
Yeah, I agree. I Another question I have for Dragonsteel is how many of these art pieces were assigned, and how many did Elia Chen just decide to make because there's what 35 art pieces in the whole book. There's several full page, full color, or at least dual color pictures. There's and then several pencil sketches. There's several monochrome pictures like the one we're looking at here. Um, uh, Without a doubt, I think this is the best visual art we've ever seen in a Cosmere book. I don't think that's hard to say at all.
It is fantastic. I agree with that. I funny enough, I just got a physical copy of the book recently, and I mean, I'm the book itself and all the little details inside of it are just immaculate, and the art is so well done.
Yeah.
So I agree with you on that, Trevor. It's just absolutely fantastic.
What did you guys think of the actual epilogue, another epilogue, where we do get several loose ends tied up in Hoyt's own words? He says to the listener that we want loose ends tied up. So Hoyt gets unfrozen. Design and Hoyt take off in a spaceship. Yumi and Painter get inherited the noodle shop, which I think is funny because it's been well established in this book that neither of them have any cooking skill at all. Which I just enjoyed that because design leaves it to Yumi and Painter, and neither of them can cook at all. And we get a couple name drops at the end of the book, which is an interesting place to put them.
I thought it was good. I thought it wrapped it up in some classic Hoyd fashion with some funny moments and a silly kissing scene and then yes, a few good Cosmere name drops. Of course, we get the name of the planet, which I think we mentioned already, which was I laughed a little bit that we it took us all the way down to like 3 pages before the end of the book to get the name of the actual planet
Yeah.
that we're on. And I think because of that, I'm gonna have a really hard time remembering it. But so I'm gonna have to write it down. Kamashi, I'm assuming is how we might say that.
Yep. What about the other planet?
Yeah, I was curious about that. So he references another planet, which is spelled a little bit strange in the book, which I'm assuming you might say this Utah or something like that.
Yeah, I think it's Utol or Utol.
Okay. It just has the first two letters of the word are capitalized, and it's clearly not a typo because it happens multiple times. It seems to be a, I don't know, referencing something. The way it's kind of referenced in the story here, clearly this is something that I'm supposed to know what this is, and this is potentially a big reveal or maybe just a small reveal or clearly a nod and a wink to, oh yeah, and by the way, this planet is next to Utah. Wink, wink. Like, I don't know what that is, but I'm sure this is a pretty big Raffo moment for me at least. That it's got to be in one of the books
Paul, do you know what it is?
we haven't read
I
yet.
was
I'm
I was
pretty
thinking
confident.
the same thing, Elliot. I was like, maybe this is like something we just haven't read yet. Maybe this is Elantris. Maybe this is Mistborn Era 2 somehow. Maybe this is a different secret project. I I don't know what Utah is.
There was at least one other direct Elantris reference in
There
this
was.
story. I'm guessing. I'm sure there were more that I didn't get because I haven't read that book. But there's one that was a direct reference to Elantris. I'm guessing this is another that he's tying into that story, but I have nothing to base that on. It's a complete guess.
I do think it's interesting that we haven't read Elantris, but there's no like direct foreshadowing in Elantris because it's the first book and he didn't really intend or know that he was going to put it in the quote unquote Cosmere. That wasn't even a thing back then. So he's doing a lot of retroactive references to Elantris. Is this one of them? I don't know. Anything else from the epilogue? Oh yeah, I have something else.
I was gonna say.
Design or Hoyd and design reference. You remember that time I lost my memories? And design says, "Oh yeah, that was hilarious." And Hoyd comes back with, "No, it wasn't. It was horrible." That's I wouldn't call it spoiler territory, but if you know what we're talking about, that's quite the reference.
That is quite the reference. That's what I was curious to talk with y'all about. Maybe more than anything else, because this is more what's going on in the Cosmere question. He mentions these protection protocols or some kind of like innate protection spell thing was like triggered
Mm-hmm.
that I'm guessing he implemented after he had his memory wiped. But I'm like, is there something that he had before the what we have read or what? I'm curious to know what y'all think.
I also had the same question. Does this imply that A, he put this in place after Rhythm of War, or B, that he already has this in Rhythm of War and what big spoilers for Rhythm of War, for and what Todium thought he accomplished he did not.
The way I took this was the former,
Mm-hmm.
in that he did not have protections in place for that event and later put them in so that investiture methods could not affect him in some way. It's a little confusing the way it's kind of explained. He basically says, I'd landed on the planet, and that big old machine that is sucking investiture out of spirits started sucking investiture out of me, and my defense mechanism kicked in and was like, don't do that. Statue, which is kind of funny, and I think design mocks him for it a little bit, and that he has to defend himself and say, "Well, it wasn't supposed to happen like that. I didn't intentionally turn myself into a statue, but at least I protected myself from the machine, I guess."
Yeah, I was taking it about the same way Elliot. It is funny, and my understanding is that is how it works pretty much. Is it's some kind of innate thing that it's like, I guess if his soul or investiture or whatever starts to get siphoned or altered or something like that, his body just, I guess he just becomes a statue for who knows how long. Roughly the length of this story, I guess. Um, or longer than this story, you know.
I did feel a little bit encouraged by this, though. When we left Rhythm of War, I at least was pretty terrified that Hoyd, kind of untouchable Hoyd, just had his memory stolen. And we talked about this, quite a bit of, oh my gosh, how much did he lose? Is this going to be terrible? Does Todium have all his memories and now he's not going to be able to do anything? This at least tells me at some point in the future, not only has Hoyd, he's semi fine, he also knows that in the past his memories were stolen and seems somewhat okay with that scenario. And
Yeah,
so
he references it fairly
it's not
casually, which is
exactly.
interesting. Yeah.
It's not like those memories are stolen and he never ever gets them back in the future. And whether he has them back or not, he at least knows in this moment that that has happened in the past, which that alone makes me feel slightly better about where we left Hoyt at the end of Rhythm of War.
I agree. I know I had mentioned this before, and I still don't believe it. It's more so wishful thinking of maybe Hoyd Loki was the one who pulled a fast one on Odium at that time. There's not much grounding for that. However, well, one, this does confirm I think that his memory was stolen, but I mean we'll just have to wait for a while to know what actually happens after the fact there. We don't know. Like I said, I could believe it if he already had some defense tool in place at that time, or if that came after the fact. So I'll be curious to see how that turns up. But that was actually really neat. I think that was a fun little nod of getting to see, how getting some acknowledgement on that, I guess. Um, since I have to wait another year for book 5 anyways. So
Elliot, you have the postscript in the outline. Would you like to talk about something that is not in the book, for the record, is postscript?
It is after the story, but it is still in the book. When I pick up the book, that in my hands is the postscript. That's how I think about it. But the I chuckled a little bit actually by the fact that there was a postscript. It's almost as, Hoyd, our narrator, took a moment to pull us aside as readers and explain. Brandon felt like he had to do the same thing. At the end of the book, he said, he put some of his thoughts into the end to talk about his inspirations and reasons for writing, and then explicitly says in the postscript that this is his favorite secret project, which is that like, having a favorite child? I feel like that's not allowed. Because are you allowed to have a favorite book when you're an author?
I mean, uh, I've heard him been asked what book are you most proud of, and he has the cop out answer of whichever one I'm working on currently. And I'm like, that's
Mm.
such a non-answer. I hate that. But this is a
Hmm.
pretty definitive. This is my favorite secret project. So yeah.
Yeah, it was very clear. There's a few other bits in the postscript that I'll tie into some of my book as a whole thoughts we talk about next week. But yeah, I just thought it was interesting that there even was a postscript. I don't know if you guys had any thoughts on it.
I didn't have anything major. I did like that he mentions it's his favorite. We were talking about that, but it is kind of refreshing, I guess, to see that direct answer. I honestly feel kind of lucky. I don't remember the initial plan or thought process that Trevor had for choosing this secret project and not the others, but I'm glad you did. I mean, I feel like this is a really cool one. I haven't read the others to compare, but if it's Brandon Sanderson's favorite of them, then I feel like that's pretty neat, you know?
I don't. I also don't remember why I decided on Secret Project 3. There was reasoning behind it, but I also kind of felt I remember feeling like this one specifically would be good to read right when it came out for you guys for whatever reason. I don't remember why, but I did have that specific thought that this one would be special to read on release.
No, I pushed for it just because I was really itching to cover a book on the podcast like this as it released, immediately upon release, because everything we'd read up till now had been published at least a year before we covered it, most of them many years before we covered it. And so to do one fresh right as it gets in the hands of the readers so that we could interact with all of you guys out there, our listeners and folks, that jump into our Discord, that experience has been a ton of fun, and I'm glad we did.
Anything else for this episode, gentlemen?
All I got.
No further questions, Your Honor.
All right. Let's talk about the whole book next week. Until then, thanks for joining me, Elliot and Paul.
See you on the flip side.
Bye.